Welcome everyone to today's webinar, 7 Trends Shaping Knowledge Management in 2025. We're excited to have you with us for what promises to be an insightful discussion about the key forces shaping the future of knowledge management. As organizations continue to adapt, rapid technological advancements are evolving workplace dynamics. Leveraging knowledge effectively has become more critical driver of innovation, productivity, and growth. Now, on to the good stuff. So today we're going to explore the trends that are defining this new era, ranging from the growing role of AI in clean data to the importance of consumer-grade enterprise tools and building seamless technology ecosystems. These trends are transforming the way that businesses manage knowledge and empowering teams to work smarter and achieve more. To guide us through these game-changing topics, we have a few Bloomfire executives here to kind of guide us through this. So first, Sam Schneider, our Chief Operating Officer. Sam is a dynamic leader with a track record of driving operational efficiency and strategic transformation. She has years of experience optimizing business processes and scaling organizations for sustainable growth. She plays a pivotal role in ensuring Bloomfire operates seamlessly while delivering exceptional value to our customers. And also Dan Stradtman, Bloomfire's Chief Marketing Officer. Dan brings over 2 decades of experience in insights and marketing strategy, helping organizations bridge the gap between data and decision-making. Throughout his career, Dan has been at the forefront of leveraging insights and shaping go-to-market strategies. He's also enhanced customer engagements and driven business growth throughout his career. He understands the evolving landscape of knowledge management and how organizations can turn information into a competitive advantage. So Sam and Dan, thank you so much for joining us. Sam, we'll start with you. Our first trend is corporate data. Is it an asset or a liability? Sam, what are some practical steps that leaders can take to ensure their teams treat data as a valuable asset instead of allowing it to become a liability?
Thank you, David, and thanks for having me here. So the short answer is corporate data can be both an asset or a liability. Businesses generate a vast amount of information, but not all of it is going to be valuable. And a large portion of these data stores can be considered redundant, outdated, trivial information, or what we call rot data. And that can drain a company's resources, that can increase costs, and that can complicate the decision-making process. So if rot data isn't addressed, it can really undermine the value of critical knowledge within your data ecosystem. We're actually a close partner with Gartner, and a stat that really resonated with me recently was poor data quality can cost an organization an average of $12.9 million annually. And with the rapid advancements that we've seen with generative AI technology over the last 2 years, ensuring clean, high-quality source data is going to be a key priority for businesses in 2025. After all, the quality of your input data directly impacts the quality of your AI output. So the challenge really lies in identifying and managing valuable corporate data. And for organizations to fully tap into the potential of their knowledge assets, leaders need to take more of a value-driven perspective when managing their data. So some practices for better data management are going to, be twofold. First is you can tap a person within the organization or create a steering committee and ask them or task them to create a framework that governs your data lifecycle from data creation to categorizing its strategic use to understanding the timeline of its eventual disposal and deletion. And another important practice is going to be conducting routine data audits. And this means consistent evaluation followed by timely action. And both of these practices put together are really going to protect a company's operational efficiency and long-term reputation.
Oh, great insight, Sam. It's so true. Data is only as valuable as the strategy behind it. And that stat from Gartner, 12.9 million annually, that should be a wake-up call for any organization, right? I mean, that should make a clean data a priority for sure. Dan, moving on to you. So many of us are challenged to prove the financial impact that knowledge management has. What are you seeing, and how can we be prepared to show that financial impact?
Yeah, thanks, David. So, I think where we're at today, and a lot of this is being driven by the rapid technological advancement, is being able to demonstrate the financial impact of a knowledge or data management program really isn't able to be theoretical anymore. It has to be part of the business reality. And what we've seen is organizations that kind of struggle to actively manage their knowledge assets, they're facing real financial risk. In 2025, the challenge really isn't managing the knowledge, it's proving its direct impact on revenue, on efficiency, and on cost reduction. So, let's think through this a little bit, right? You got to make that case. You got to make that case to leadership. Part of what we believe is successful is when you start to treat knowledge like a financial asset and you adopt a value-driven approach to knowledge management. So here's a few ways to think about that. One is quantify that data's financial impact. How do you assign financial value to the data? You can kind of ask these questions, right? How much time is lost searching for information? How often are bad decisions made due to outdated knowledge? Sam talked about rot. We certainly see a lot of the decision making being based on data. Companies not doing knowledge management and having that platform basing it off of old data. And then can you start to quantify the revenue impact that those have on being driven by faster knowledge access? How does that impact sales? How does that impact customer service? Or how does that impact innovation? Data that doesn't contribute clearly to that growth or retention or operational efficiency really should be flagged and reconsidered. It's extraneous. And so you establish these KPIs to help turn knowledge management from a vague initiative into what we would consider to be a balance sheet priority. Secondly, you're going to have to overcome resistance to change, right? So everybody, sometimes can have this just in case mentality when it comes to knowledge or information. And so you hold on to things longer. The reality when you hold on, to that rot data, it actually costs more than deleting it. And so, as a leader, you have to educate your teams on the financial risks of hoarding unnecessary information, and then emphasize data cleanliness as a competitive advantage. At Bloomfire, we really do try to help maximize the value of knowledge across an enterprise by turning it into intelligence, right? And that the AI platform that we have, it automatically categorizes things. It can help surface the important insight or the important knowledge, and it maintains that relevant knowledge. And so what that's going to do is it's going to prevent that outdated data from really leading to those costly missteps. We integrate across different enterprise tools, Salesforce, Teams, others, and make sure that that information can be available exactly where and when it's needed. And really the bottom line comes down to, David, if you're not actively managing the financial value of your knowledge assets, you're leaving money on the table, or worse, creating risk. And I think the organizations that implement the auditing, the lifecycle governance, the quantifiable KPIs, they're going to be the ones that win in 2025, and they're going to raise the overall level of enterprise intelligence for their company.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think examining that real impact of knowledge management, it's such a great place to start because, while no two companies are the same, I think we often face similar problems, and prioritizing how we solve for those problems is an important thing. So, Dan, I want to stick with you in our next trend around the role that IT is playing in strategic innovation. So, Dan, how can marketing and IT collaborate effectively to ensure that innovative technologies like AI or something with AI are seamlessly adopted and aligned with broader business strategies?
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal shift in the last few years. I mean, I've in the Fortune 500 companies I've worked with over my 20 plus years, there have been times where the roles I've had have sat within kind of an IT function, a data function. And so I think the role of IT is fundamentally evolved, especially in the last 2 years. It's, in some companies it could be seen as a support function. Really now that's not an option. It has to be seen as a strategic partner capable of driving innovation in the company. I think this is just exacerbated by kind of the rise of generative AI. And so, not only in the last couple of years do you have all these cybersecurity threats, right? That's real, that's not going away. IT leaders have also become responsible for ensuring AI's security, integration, and alignment with broader business objectives. And so going forward, their influence is only going to grow as they lead the charge in creating these interconnected ecosystems and setting kind of the governance frameworks. When it comes to collaboration, especially between like IT, marketing, there's a few areas. One is just back to that AI governance and ethics, right? IT is going to play a vital role in establishing, what is the ethical way to adopt AI? What's the governance around it? That can include, everything from algorithm biases to ensuring data security. And, marketing's part in that, I think, where they can really help IT is how do you then tie it to the business value? And so it doesn't just come off as just overly restrictive. And then, how does it frame into the organization's overall values and build trust across the employee base? Secondly, that effective collaboration starts with early involvement. I think, having IT leaders involved in the decision-making process now is just more critical than it's been. Because these strategies are starting to layer on top of each other. We've actually seen that companies that foster that kind of strong relationship between IT and the business line are more likely to achieve their digital transformation goals. Gartner says it's actually, when you do that, it can be upwards of 30% more likely. And then last, it's just prioritization. There's a lot of silos out there in tech stacks. Like I said before, Bloomfire is really there to kind of be able to be scalable and interoperable across an organization's platforms. And so by creating a unified knowledge sharing environment while supporting those broader innovation goals, I think ultimately, that's going to lead to a better result faster. And so, IT's got to approach this collaboration with that shared vision, have an innovation mindset, understand, the technical and ethical complexities of AI. And, when they work hand in hand with the business teams and the marketing teams, I think you're going to end up with better outcomes in terms of adoption. And you're going to see, AI is not just something, new and shiny, as an innovative thing, but it really becomes a bigger piece to the long-term success of that company.
Yeah, definitely. Dan, I remember back to some of the earlier points in my career, and it definitely felt like IT was involved much more in a back-end support function. And they would maybe learn about projects after they had already been in motion or maybe even nearing completion. And now they're much more involved in proactively selecting the tech stack partners and definitely aligning that ecosystem to real business goals.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of that in my career, I can definitely say.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to our next trend. Sam, we'll popcorn back to you. And our next trend is maximizing growth through productivity. So Sam, how can organizations create a culture that prioritizes productivity without risking burnout, especially when leveraging automation and AI tools?
Thanks, David. So productivity investments are a hot trend in 2025 for companies aiming to drive earnings growth while controlling costs, especially if you're a company and you find yourself in a low growth economic environment. There was a recent PricewaterhouseCoopers survey that I read that stated 57% of executives view productivity enhancements as critical for sustaining growth year over year. And a lot of companies out there, like we are here at Bloomfire, they're leveraging AI-driven tools like a knowledge management solution. And that can improve employee productivity by allowing a greater focus on strategic tasks, which will directly prevent burnout. So some examples of where you as a leader can drive productivity gains, the obvious first choice is going to be increased automation. Leverage a tool, increase automation, eliminate as many manual processes as possible, and streamline workflows. This is going to directly and positively impact productivity, and it will free up employees from these tedious manual tasks to strategic, high-impact, complex work. And that's going to prevent burnout. Second, most important, because I'm an operations executive, measure productivity. Make sure what you implement is actually working, whether it's licensing new technology or, implementing a new process. Track ROI, have clear KPIs like Looking at your administrative time, you're going to want to reduce that or, improve employee satisfaction. And then finally, to build out that culture, align productivity with strategic goals. Ensure that productivity investments are laddering up and supporting key business objectives. A great metric that anyone can utilize would be looking at resource capacity and making sure that increases, where your employees can complete more tasks in the same amount of time as the past, and compare that to the benchmark.
Thanks, Sam. It's clear that productivity isn't just about working faster, it's about working smarter. I think that stat from PwC really drives that home. All right, let's go to our next trend, which is around building a tech ecosystem. Dan, we'll come to you for this one. So Dan, as businesses transition from standalone tech stacks to these interconnected ecosystems, how can marketing teams support IT in driving the integrations that maximize collaboration and efficiency across those departments?
Yeah, it's kind of ladders back to what we talked about before, right, David? So, I think the trend really is organizations moving away from kind of just tool acquisition, and they're focusing more now on integration of existing tools or existing kind of tech stacks. And so this is it's going to continue intensify in 2025. And, businesses are starting to recognize like, hey, having a seamless integration is a key to breaking down those silos and getting collaboration out of this, getting better decision making out of this, and like I said, raising kind of the overall enterprise intelligence of a particular company. And so, as a marketer myself, like I'm thinking about how could I support an IT department in this, and one is like just being a champion. Marketers are very good at advocating and kind of creating the words around that. And so, marketing can help tell that story around how interconnected ecosystems emphasize, collaboration, how they emphasize knowledge sharing, and that ultimately, if you have these unified systems, you're going to end up with a comprehensive view of business operations like you haven't seen. I can pull back an example from my past in one of the larger companies where, we had a new leader, and one of the things he was really trying to do is just connect all the systems, right? To say, hey, what do we buy? What does it cost to buy something? What does it cost to make the things that we make? And then what do we get back when we sell it in the market? And you would think something that simple is readily available in a company of a size, but oftentimes the systems aren't connected in a way that makes that, kind of able to be consumed by the average employee of a company. Another way marketing can help is just enable those best practices for integrations. And so, what are some of those best practices? Like, utilize open AIs, maintaining good data standards, establishing that centralized governance, and being able to tell that story. Because this is, ultimately a foundation you can build off of for, setting expectations and then communicating those across an organization. I think lastly, if we think about that, it's, focus on scalability and adaptability. So future is very unpredictable. Just talking with our leadership team today about some of the changes we've seen over the past year in terms of generative AI and those types of advancements. And so when you're thinking about building an ecosystem, flexibility is actually really key. Marketing, can help partner with IT to ensure that ecosystems are scalable, that they are going to support the end goal of growth and kind of the evolving organizational needs. And so kind of from a market back way, marketing can help inform IT like, hey, like this is the need today, but this is the need where it's going to head. And so how do you add flexibility into your decision making around ecosystems? So yeah, I mean, I think when these teams can work together, from a market back and then from a technology forward standpoint, you're really laying the foundation to be able to link the tools with the desire for kind of innovation and sustainable growth.
Yeah. And, coming from someone who myself and manages a tech ecosystem for just a singular department, moving from disconnected tools to a truly unified tech ecosystem. It's not just a nice to have anymore. It really is a must have when you're aiming to break down those silos and drive collaboration. So with that, we'll go to our next trend, which is clean data and smarter AI. So Sam, with increasingly dependent with AI increasingly dependent on high quality data, what strategies can organizations implement to ensure their data is clean and AI ready and reduce the risks of associated with dark data?
Oh, dark data, that sounds so nefarious. So dark data, or you could call it rot data, it's really just categorized as poorly managed information, and it can represent pretty significant business risk. It's actually a persistent and pervasive problem that we see here today in my current role at Bloomfire, especially when we start partnering with different companies. And according to Splunk's global survey, I think 60% of respondents admitted that half or more of their organization's data qualified as dark. So why does this matter? Why should anyone care about this? Dark data introduces critical risks that can actually hinder your business. And again, as an operations executive, I can think of 3 reasons why dark data does introduce critical risks. First is going to be waste or wasted resources. So storing and maintaining unused or unnecessary, unhelpful data consumes valuable resources, and that can increase inefficiencies. Second, an increase in operational costs from storage and also compliance. And then finally, with the advent of all this generative AI technology, dark data can cause a reduction in the accuracy of your AI models. So when poor quality data is fed into AI systems, it can actually lead to flawed insights and complicate the decision-making process and also reduce employee trust. So think garbage in, garbage out. And we all know that AI systems are only as good as the data that they sit on top of. So if you want to optimize AI performance, you have to make data quality a top priority this year. So here's how you can make this happen. Again, sit down, get a team together, and build out a solid data governance framework to manage your data from data creation all the way to data deletion. Second, advanced cleaning tools. You can leverage those to spot and deal with rot. And that would be redundant, outdated, trivial information. And then finally, run regular data audits to keep dark data from impacting your AI performance. A good recent example of this would be we partnered with an energy company. They just implemented our AI tools. And they have a really good regular data audit process in place where they'll run a monthly check using their golden set of questions and answers. So once a month, they'll run their questions through their AI tool and then review all the answers. And if an incorrect answer is generated, their tool looks into the source data, and then they'll determine what was the cause of the issue, whether it was redundant information, conflicting information, or something that was out of date, and they resolve it timely. So really good practice that any company could leverage today.
Yeah, I really like how you broke down the risks, Sam, of the wasted resources, the rising costs, and the flawed AI outputs. I think it's like a triple threat that you really have to examine and see if can you really afford to ignore those things? Because I think the answer is most likely no. And that brings us to another major shift in enterprise technology, expectations around usability. It's no longer just about having the right tools. It's about making sure they're intuitive, seamless, and actually enjoyable to use. So, Dan, our next trend is delivering consumer-grade experiences for enterprise users. As companies strive to bring that consumer-grade experience to enterprise tools, how can personalization play a role in driving user adoption and engagement?
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of a tale as old as software in some ways for the B2B side. I've worked on the consumer side, I've worked on B2B, and there's often a very large chasm between kind of what you and I as a consumer experience, something as simple as Google, right, to be able to go out there and search and ostensibly find what we're looking for, versus trying to do that in your company, maybe extraordinarily difficult. And so, there is this expectation, like, I can find things, I can shop for things, right? Like in in my business life, much like in my consumer life, and it just hasn't kept pace. So, I think, in the last year, I think there's more demands from some of the consumer apps, like, ChatGPT is a great example where, it's really a consumer designed app, for lack of a better term. And you saw it getting used in enterprise ways that scared the heck out of a lot of IT companies and compliance officers because of the nature of the beast. And so, now you're starting to see AI kind of layer in different ways. But, if companies don't close that usability gap, you end up with, kind of poor adoption of the tools you do have. You lose productivity, your employees are frustrated, and you can open yourself up to real security risk because people are going to want to use them in their business life as well. So personalization is a big piece of that, and in terms of how you close that gap. Um, you know, for example, just a few examples, like I think overall personalization helps drive engagement. And so, if I'm thinking about it from a knowledge management perspective, employees don't want to sift through mountains of irrelevant content. They want to be able to kind of have what surfaces to them what's most relevant in their own role. And so, that means they're going to have that inflection point, the information they need, where they need it, wherever they're working from, and decrease that overall friction. Um, Automation is becoming a big piece of this as well. Everything from just, the ability for, different tools driven by AI to automate, summarization, or to automate kind of content creation, to, now moving into more agentic behavior, right? Where you're able to, kind of automate routine tasks or those types of things. And so that's going to grow over the next year or two, to get very specific to different employee roles and have it be very personalized to the work that needs to be done. Talked about it kind of in every pass, but integration, right? So, when you have this sprawling, enterprise tech stack, how do you make sure you break down those silos so that you can look across the systems and you can allow the employees to access the knowledge that they have access to, right? You need security controls within the platforms they're already using, whether that's a CRM, a collab tool, a KM system, customer support system. But ultimately, I think the future of enterprise software really is getting really personalized. And so, for companies that are making those choices around, hey, what do I invest in? Where is there going to be, back to flexibility I mentioned before. The companies that are choosing options that have more personalization, they're going to see higher engagement, they're going to see increased productivity, they're going to see better adoption. And the companies that don't or stay with the status quo, there's going to be some frustration around employees and some underutilized tech investments. And at worst, you're setting yourself up for security risk because people gravitate towards those consumer-like tools. So.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and when employees have systems that they like and they're adapting to their needs, they're more likely to actually use them, which like you mentioned, drives productivity and maximizes the value that the organization is going to get back from their tech investments, which leads us directly into our next trend, conveniently enough, proving value and securing budget. With technology investments under maybe greater scrutiny than ever, organizations have to demonstrate the measurable impact to justify spend. Sam, we'll come to you for this last one. In your experience, what are the most common challenges that organizations face when quantifying the financial impact of their data, and how can they overcome them?
Oh, this is my favorite topic. So just proving ROI really isn't cutting it anymore. Executives need to explain why they're spending money and how it ties to big picture goals like growing revenue or cutting costs or just keeping customers happy. According to a recent IBM study, 64% of CFOs are feeling the heat to justify investments, making it clear that they need to show both financial value and strategic impact to the company. To overcome challenges in pitching your investments in technology, There's really 3 best practices that ensure success, and we have a pretty high success rate here because, we partner with customers during the pre-sale process, and this is shown to be really effective. First is tie investments to business outcomes that really matter to your leadership team. So show that your tech spend directly tackles things like cutting inefficiencies or boosting customer happiness or even speeding up the decision-making process. A second best practice is going to be build a data-driven business case. And this step is actually pretty underutilized today. So what you would do is build a pitch using real numbers, use historical information and company benchmarks for your company. For example, if you're pitching a knowledge base, calculate how much time and money you'll save from cutting down on information searches or maybe reducing or a reduction in your onboarding time for your new employees. And then finally, revisit budget decisions regularly. And I would recommend doing this on an annual basis. Check if past investments are still paying off and still line up to your organizational needs. A lot of technology that we've been leveraging over the last 5 to 10 years may not be applicable anymore. And then this ongoing evaluation will ensure that you are able to adjust strategies, stay nimble, and ensure continuous alignment and value and benefit across the organization.
Yeah, it's a great reality check, Sam. Proving the ROI is just not enough anymore. So thank you for that, and great job with the stats. I really love all the stats you brought in. That's awesome. Quick time check. I see that we have a little bit of time for questions. We had one that just came in that I thought was interesting. The question said, Chris said, I understand the importance around creating a quantifiable metric around knowledge, but I am struggling to find how that comes to life. Can you share an example of how one of your customers was able to quantify a specific metric to show ROI?
Do you want me to take that one,
Yeah,
David?
Dan, do you want to take that one, Dan?
Sure.
I think it's a good one.
Yeah, so, I think Sam explained it really well. Let me try to bring it to life. So we'd been working with a customer for a while. They had kind of a small departmental type of knowledge program, and then the goal was to bring it across the entire organization. And so, part of that exercise, like Sam said, was how do you create that business case? How do you start to figure out like what's going to be the right story to tell to the C-suite to be able to get this greater investment in resource? And so, without giving away anything, what we were able to do was to say, okay, let's look and understand the value that you've received out of this from an efficiency standpoint from search, right? So we created kind of a multiplier for heavy users of the system, which was ultimately going to be about a quarter of all the new users, and then light users of the system. So the heavy users were maybe saving several hours per week versus the light users were saving an hour a month. We know, working with them, like what the average salary of those types of employees were. So now you can start doing some math to go, hey, if we're taking that efficiency and we're applying it to the cost of an employee, you can start to say, well, there's a real numerical value in that investment. Then we started looking in some places that may not be as straightforward. Efficiency and of search is a pretty straightforward one. We said, well, how many people do you hire a year? How many people change jobs in a year? You're using this platform as a tool to help with onboarding, to be able to come up to speed on a particular category or as they move across different roles in the organization. And so, we've got some of our own data as well as their data, but really that was kind of creating a time to proficiency that dropped 30% from the overall time needed to onboard someone versus what it used to be. So right there, you could demonstrate, if you're hiring 100 people a year and maybe you got 25, that are moving jobs, that becomes a powerful number in terms of the quantification of the benefit of the knowledge system. And then lastly, just duplication of effort. They're writing a lot of summaries. They're creating emails that have summaries of reports. having to kind of rewrite them every time or rethink them. Having access to this actually cuts down on that rework. It cuts down on, the need to even send an email, because you can kind of flip them right to the content with the write-up in it, which has, by the way, been enhanced by our author assist tool, right? Our AI author assist tool, which makes it pretty quick to be able to summarize things. And so you're creating some cost savings there, because again, you're not redoing work that's been done before. But ultimately, when we started to do that math, going from a small installation to a several thousand employee base, you're talking about a value upwards of $15 million over the 3-year contract that we were working with them on, and that was a very easy discussion for the folks in this area who wanted the additional resource to have with their leadership team. So, like Sam said, our team is very effective at doing that. It's we have a process that we use with customers and folks we're talking to about potentially partnering with us, and it's become a necessity, I think, in today's world to be able to have that quantification. So hopefully that helps maybe delineate a little bit on specific metrics that can demonstrate that return.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that, and thank you for the question. And I think we have time for just one more. Sam, I think this one will go to you. It's around the clean data trend. The question that came in was, how do you determine which data is worth keeping and investing in versus what should be eliminated to reduce the costs and inefficiencies?
Oh, that's a big, great question. That can vary. So really, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Company information or data by company can vary dramatically. There's some industries where data is very evergreen; it doesn't change often. Other industries, it changes very frequently. So there's not really a one-size-fits-all approach. However, you can leverage a strategic framework that can ensure that data remains valuable. I have a good example for this. So we recently worked with an insurance company that had this issue. They partnered with us and said, hey, come on site, help us improve our data quality. So our approach really focused on the 3 areas of rot. First area is going to be eliminating duplicative content. We sat down, we identified, we removed redundant information. And the benefit of doing that is, it reduces the amount of data that you're, consuming and also storing, and also improved AI models. It's going to prevent inconsistencies from, affecting your AI output. Second is defining what outdated meant. So again, you have that industry by industry example, but even within a company, you can't really apply a generic time frame across all of your data. So sitting down and looking at the categories of information and applying some specific business rules based off of internal business processes or compliance, based on that category of data, we were able to come up with a good framework for different timelines. And then finally, removing trivial information. So as a reminder, not all corporate data is valuable. We helped categorize, we helped remove information that didn't necessarily contribute to strategic decision-making or helping the company operate day to day.
Great. Thanks so much, Sam. I appreciate that. And that brings us to the end of today's discussion. A huge thank you to you, Sam and Dan, for joining us and for providing all those insights. We covered a lot of ground, and if you want to dive deeper on any of those trends, please don't forget to check out the full report that's linked here in the webinar, and keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be sending out the recording very shortly. Thanks again for joining us and being part of our conversation, and we'll see you next time.